let's take a deep dive inside a graphics card. Now, a graphics card, or GPU, which stands for Graphics Processing Unit, are used for 3D applications, such as video games, video editing, video rendering, 3D design or 3D rendering, and things along that line. Now, on the outside, a graphics card looks pretty big and complicated. They've got, big fans. They even have triple fan coolers, which has a third fan. They've got these big heat sinks, and they look pretty big and complicated, and they're pretty bulky, especially higher power ones like this, GTX 1070 right here. But when you break it down, they actually are pretty simple. So let's open it up and see what this thing is like inside. Now, the way every graphics card comes apart is going to be different, but on this MSI card, we've got a bunch of little screws that hold the backplate on, and then 4 screws that actually hold the cooling system to the GPU itself. So let's begin taking this apart. So now we have the backplate removed, and what the backplate is for is pretty much just to make the card look better. It covers up all these circuits on the back of the circuit board of the GPU and just makes it look a little nicer. That being said, these can be functional as well. On a lot of graphics cards, they'll have thermal pads touching the different major points of the back of the circuit board, and will provide a little bit of passive cooling on the back of the graphics card. Now, to open this up the rest of the way, we have to remove these 4 screws. And the reason these screws are in this pattern so close together is because the GPU is actually right here in the center. And so they have these screws pretty close to it surrounding the area so that the cooler can be mounted to the graphics processing unit as tightly as possible. So we can now remove the cooler, but we can't pull up on this too hard because there are some extra cables coming from the GPU circuit board itself to the cooling fans, and what these cables are for the to power the fans, and in the case of this card, the RGB lighting as well. But once we have those disconnected, the card comes apart from the cooler. Now, the next thing we need to take off is this aluminum plate here, which is covering all of the memory modules. Now, this tiny little thing right here is actually the GPU itself, so all of that cooling, that massive heat sink and all those large fans are pretty much to cool this little guy right here, because this thing outputs a lot of heat. And if you're wondering what this kind of gray, weird looking stuff is here, that's called thermal paste. And what thermal paste does is kind of a pasty stuff that has either copper or aluminum in it, some type of metal, and basically you put it on top of the processing unit itself. That way it fills in any air gaps, and it will allow even transfer of heat between the processing unit and the cooler. So if we zoom out a little bit, you can see these little black modules here. They're like little black rectangles. One of them still has the thermal pads on it from the aluminum plate. Basically, this works just like the RAM in your computer. In a graphics card's case, this holds information like textures or rendering information that the GPU doesn't need at the moment but will need later, and then it can easily transfer between the GPU and the VRAM. And the more you have, like this card has 8 gigabytes of VRAM, the more you have, basically, the more information it can hold, so you'll be able to run higher graphics settings and things like that if you have more VRAM. Now, if you look over here to the side of the GPU, we have all this stuff over here, and this is basically just the power management system for the graphics card. You can see you have an 8-pin connector here and a 6-pin here. That's where you'd connect the cables from your power supply to the graphics card. And then this is basically kind of the power management system for the graphics card, which then sends power wherever it is needed. So on the subject of power management, this right here is where the graphics card actually slots into the PCI Express X16 slot on your motherboard. These PCI Express lanes usually transfer power up to 75 watts, but what they're mostly used for is to actually transfer data to and from the computer itself. So now that we've gone through how a graphics card works, let's look into how all of this is actually cooled. So if we flip over this cooler right here, we can see there's a lot going on here. So this is the actual plate that sits on top of the GPU itself, and then as you can see we have all these heat pipes coming out of it. So what those do is transfer heat to the heatsink, where these fans blow through the heatsink and basically cool the hot air and blow the hot air out of the system. So that's pretty much, it's actually pretty simple the way it works, but it is very effective and looks more complicated than it really is. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you think I missed something or you have questions about something, feel free to leave a comment down in the comment section below. I hope you guys enjoyed it, I hope you learned something, and thank you so much for watching.